The roar of the sea was drowned out by a storm of steel and fire. June 6th, 1944. Normandy. The wind whipped sand into men's faces as the doors of the landing crafts dropped with a heavy crash. Soldiers surged forward into the icy water, carrying rifles above their heads, trying not to sink under the weight of their gear. Bullets tore the air like angry wasps, striking helmets, piercing flesh. Among them was Private First Class William Carter, just 23, a farm boy from Iowa who had never seen the ocean before that day. His boots slipped on the wet stones as he pushed forward, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. Beside him, a fellow soldier fell, clutching his side. William didn't think twice. He grabbed the man by the straps of his vest and dragged him toward a jagged piece of metal that offered the slightest cover. "Stay with me," he shouted over the chaos, blood and seawater mingling at his feet. The man's eyes fluttered, but William pressed his hand against the wound, whispering through the thunder of artillery, "You're not dying here. Not today." Somehow, by sheer will, he hauled the soldier further up the beach. Every step felt impossible. But he made it, and then he went back again and again. By the end of that endless morning, William had pulled 3 men to safety. He was just one face among thousands, but for those whose lives he touched, he was the difference between death and a second chance. The war didn't end that day, not for him, not for any of them. But the memory of Normandy stayed etched in his soul forever. 70 years later, the roar of the sea had been replaced by the hum of an old refrigerator in a cramped apartment outside Des Moines. William Carter was 94 now. His body was frail, his hands trembling as he adjusted his glasses. But his mind was sharp, alive with memories. On the wall above his small wooden table hung a frame, a faded photograph of young men in uniform, their arms slung around each other, grinning in a rare moment of respite. Most of them were gone now. William sat staring at the picture, his eyes glistening. He remembered their voices, their laughter, their promises of coming home. He remembered the fear, too, the moments when he thought he wouldn't live to see another dawn. For decades, he had carried these stories quietly. His medals sat in a box that few had ever seen. The world had moved on. Younger generations busy with their lives, barely remembering the sacrifices made on those beaches. William didn't complain. He never had. But inside, there was a longing that grew stronger each year. "I just want to see it one more time," he whispered to himself. Normandy. The cliffs, the sand, the memorials that now stood where chaos once reigned. He wanted to stand there, not as a soldier, but as an old man, to say goodbye to the boys who never made it home. But dreams cost money, and William's pension barely covered rent, medicine, and groceries. The idea of flying across the ocean at his age, on his budget, was almost laughable. He sighed, turning the photo frame gently toward the light. Every year he watched television footage of the D-Day ceremonies. Presidents, generals, school children laying flowers. He saw the dwindling ranks of his fellow veterans and wondered if the world would ever truly understand what had been given up that day. That summer, on the 70th anniversary of the invasion, William's story made its way into a small local newspaper. A journalist had come by, hoping to interview the old man about his memories. He was hesitant at first. Modesty had always been his armor. But when the article was published, it caught unexpected attention. Across the country, thousands of miles away, someone else read it. An actor sitting quietly in his home, scrolling through stories about D-Day veterans. He paused at William's photo. The wrinkled face, the weary eyes, the medals half hidden in the background. Tom Hanks had long admired the courage of World War II soldiers. He had portrayed them on screen, produced documentaries about their sacrifices, and spoken openly about the debt owed to that generation. But this was personal. A man who had risked everything on the shores of Normandy now wanted nothing more than to return, and couldn't. Hanks closed his laptop slowly, a decision already forming in his mind. Tom Hanks sat in his quiet study, the glow of the computer screen fading as he leaned back in his chair. The article about William Carter would not leave his mind. This wasn't just another story of a veteran. This was a man who had carried the weight of sacrifice for nearly a century. And now, at the twilight of his life, all he wanted was a chance to stand once more on the sands of Normandy. A chance to say goodbye. Hanks had seen veterans before, spoken with them, cried with them. He knew the fragility of time. Every year, fewer and fewer men returned to those beaches. He thought of the film Saving Private Ryan, of the countless hours spent trying to capture even a fraction of what those soldiers endured. But here was a real man, not a character, who had lived it, and who was now quietly fading into obscurity. Tom picked up the phone. The next weeks unfolded like a secret mission. Without publicity, without fanfare, he began arranging what William had thought impossible. He contacted the journalist who had written the article, tracked down William's family, and quietly paid for every detail. The flights, the hotel near the Normandy coast, medical assistance to travel safely. Nothing was left to chance. The actor insisted on anonymity, but word had a way of spreading, and soon whispers reached William's small town. Someone was making this dream come true. One afternoon, William's phone rang. His trembling hand lifted the receiver. On the other end was the journalist who had first interviewed him. "Mr. Carter," the voice said warmly, "pack your bags. You're going to Normandy." For a long moment, William thought it was a cruel joke. His lips parted, but no words came. "That's not possible," he finally whispered. "It is," the journalist said. "You'll see." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. His dream, the one he had kept hidden in his heart, was suddenly real. He pressed the phone to his chest after the call ended, whispering a prayer of gratitude to no one in particular, or perhaps to the friends who never left that beach. The day of departure arrived with the scent of spring in the air. Neighbors gathered outside William's modest apartment to see him off. Some carried flags, others simply clapped as he walked slowly toward the waiting car. He wore a simple suit jacket, his medals pinned proudly on the breast. The sight of the frail old soldier, head held high, brought tears to more than one eye. The journey across the ocean was long, but William barely felt the hours. Each moment carried the weight of anticipation. When the plane touched down in Paris, he pressed his hand to the window, whispering softly, "I made it." Soon after, a car carried him through the rolling countryside of Normandy. The green fields stretched endlessly, dotted with white crosses that glistened under the sun. As they approached the coast, William's breath caught in his throat. The cliffs loomed in the distance. The sea roared just as it had 7 decades ago. And then, at last, he stood on Omaha Beach. The wind tugged at his jacket as he gazed out over the sand. For a moment, the years fell away. He was young again, boots sinking into the surf, heart racing as he pulled his brothers from the waves. He could hear their voices, feel their hands on his shoulders. The ghosts of Normandy were all around him, and they welcomed him home. People had gathered there that day, tourists, locals, even schoolchildren on a field trip. When they realized who he was, applause broke out. A small girl stepped forward, offering him a single white rose. William knelt slowly, accepting it with trembling hands. "I thought the world had forgotten," he murmured. "No," the girl whispered, her eyes shining. "We remember." William stood taller, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in decades, he felt complete. The weight he had carried so long was lighter now. And though he never met the man who made it possible, he would later tell anyone who asked, "An angel sent me back here." His name was Tom Hanks. The morning sun spilled gold across the rows of white crosses at the Normandy American Cemetery. The air was still, broken only by the distant crash of waves and the murmured prayers of visitors. William Carter stood among the graves, his hands trembling on the handle of his cane. He had walked this ground in nightmares for 70 years. But now he was here, not as a soldier, but as an old man paying a final debt. A guide approached softly, offering to help him find the section where men from his unit were buried. William nodded, following slowly, each step heavy with memory. They stopped before a cluster of markers, each one engraved with a name that once had a face, a laugh, a life. His lips moved as he whispered those names, tears blurring his vision. "This one," he said, his voice breaking. His hand reached out to a marble cross etched with the name of his closest friend, Daniel Price. They had grown up in the same small town, enlisted together, dreamed of returning home side by side. But Daniel never made it. He had fallen on the beach in those first chaotic minutes. William dropped to one knee, ignoring the ache in his bones, and pressed his forehead against the stone. "I promised you I'd come back," he whispered. "I kept going, for both of us. And now, I'm here." For a long moment, he stayed there, the world around him fading away. Visitors stood at a respectful distance, some quietly wiping their eyes. A group of French school children, carrying flowers, approached and gently placed them at the base of the grave. Their teacher explained softly who these men were and why they must never be forgotten. William looked up, his chest tightening with emotion. "You see, Danny?" he murmured. "They remember. Even after all this time, they remember." That evening, a small ceremony was held at the memorial overlooking the sea. William sat among other surviving veterans, their wheelchairs and canes lined up in quiet dignity. Flags rippled in the wind, and a military band played softly in the background. French officials offered speeches of gratitude, while American soldiers stood at attention. When William's name was called, he struggled to his feet. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing across the cliffs. He raised a trembling hand in acknowledgement, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow all at once. For a moment, he was not just an old man. He was the boy who had once faced death on these sands and chosen to fight for life. A television crew caught the moment, and back in the United States, millions would later see his frail silhouette against the setting sun. But for William, the cameras didn't matter. What mattered was the whisper in the wind, the voices of his brothers, the sense that he had finally fulfilled his vow. After the ceremony, William was escorted to a quiet spot overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled endlessly, just as they had on that terrible morning. He closed his eyes, listening. It was almost as if the sea itself was speaking, carrying with it the voices of the past. A French officer stood nearby, moved by the sight. He leaned toward a journalist and asked, "Who brought him here?" How did he manage this journey at his age? The journalist smiled faintly. "A friend," he said simply. "A friend who didn't want recognition." But the truth began to ripple through the small crowd. Whispers of Tom Hanks's quiet gesture spread, carried by those who had pieced the story together. Soon, people were speaking not only of the veteran, but of the actor who had made sure he was honored one last time. The applause that followed was no longer just for William. It was for the bond between past and present, for the reminder that kindness can bridge even 70 years. As the sun dipped low, William pressed his hand over his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, not only to his fallen brothers, but to the man who had given him this final pilgrimage. His eyes glistened with tears, but his smile was steady. For the first time in decades, he felt at peace. And somewhere across the ocean, Tom Hanks, reading the reports of the ceremony, smiled quietly too. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. Knowing that William Carter had found his way home was enough. When William returned to his hotel that night, exhaustion weighed on his frail body, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in decades. He sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields of Normandy. The land was quiet now, peaceful, a far cry from the chaos he had once known. He whispered to himself, it was worth every step. But the journey was not over. The next morning, William was invited to a private gathering of veterans at a small French community center. Local families had prepared food, children sang patriotic songs in both English and French, and old soldiers shared stories that carried both laughter and tears. William listened intently, his eyes wide like a young man again. For the first time in years, he was surrounded by people who understood, people who carried the same scars. During the gathering, a French woman approached him with a small bundle. "Monsieur Carter," she said softly, "my grandmother was a young girl in 1944. She remembered the Americans who liberated our town. She told us about the kindness of one soldier who gave her his chocolate rations. She never forgot." The woman's hands trembled as she unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a faded photograph of a little girl with pigtails, standing next to a smiling soldier. William's breath caught. He leaned closer. The soldier in the photograph was him. At 23, with dirt on his face and a grin that seemed impossibly young. He remembered that day. He had almost forgotten her, the girl who had clung to his arm as he shared the only sweet thing he had left. "I can't believe you kept this," William whispered. "My grandmother passed away," the woman said, her eyes filling with tears. "But she made me promise. If I ever met the soldier from the photo, I should tell him thank you." William's hands shook as he held the picture. For years he had wondered if anyone remembered his small acts of kindness amid the horrors of war. And now, 7 decades later, he had proof that even the smallest gesture could echo across time. Meanwhile, news of his pilgrimage had quietly reached the United States. The story spread from local outlets to national networks. Viewers were moved not just by the image of a 94-year-old veteran on Omaha Beach, but by the revelation that Tom Hanks had played a hidden role in making it happen. In interviews, William never boasted about himself. When asked, he only said, "I was one of many." The real heroes never came home. But when pressed about how he had managed to travel so far at his age, he finally admitted, "A friend helped me, a good man with a kind heart." That simple statement was enough. The world already knew who that friend was. Though Hanks himself remained silent, refusing to claim credit, Millions applauded his gesture. Articles praised not only William's bravery, but also the humility of an actor who understood that honoring the past was more important than headlines. On his final day in France, William returned once more to the cliffs. He stood with the help of two young soldiers who had volunteered to escort him. As he looked out over the endless sea, his voice broke in a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for letting me come back. And thank you for those who remembered." The soldiers beside him saluted, their eyes shining with respect. One of them whispered, "Sir, we serve because you showed us the way." William smiled faintly, the wind tugging at his thinning white hair. For the first time since 1944, he felt truly at peace with his past. The ghosts were no longer a burden. They were companions, walking beside him as he prepared to finish his journey home. Back in America, Tom Hanks quietly followed the reports. He didn't need recognition. To him, the real story was not about generosity, but about William Carter himself, a man whose courage had shaped the world. As he closed the newspaper one evening, Hanks whispered softly, "Rest easy, soldier. You've earned it." The return journey to America was quiet. William Carter sat by the airplane window, his reflection mingling with the endless sky. The trip had drained his frail body, but his spirit felt renewed, lighter than ever. He had walked once more on the sands of Normandy, had spoken the names of his brothers aloud, had fulfilled a promise kept in his heart for 70 long years. For him, it was more than a journey. It was closure. When he landed back home, neighbors and family were waiting at the airport. They held banners, clapped their hands, and embraced him as if welcoming back a hero from war all over again. William smiled, but his words remained modest. "I was just one soldier among many. The real heroes are still over there." Yet, in their eyes, he was more than just a soldier. He was living history. In the days that followed, his story spread further. Television networks replayed the images of him standing proudly among the white crosses, his hand over his heart. Commentators spoke of sacrifice, gratitude, and the importance of remembering. Across the nation, schools invited William to speak. Though his voice trembled, his words carried weight. Children sat wide-eyed, listening to stories that no textbook could capture. One afternoon, William was invited to a high school auditorium. The students rose to their feet as he entered, the sound of applause filling the room. Standing at the podium, he looked out at the sea of young faces and said, "Freedom is not free. It was paid for by lives, by friends I'll never forget. And all I ask is that you remember them too." His words drew tears from teachers and students alike. The ovation that followed lasted minutes. Meanwhile, Tom Hanks continued to avoid interviews on the subject. But those who knew him understood why. He never wanted the story to be about himself. He wanted the spotlight on William Carter and the countless veterans like him. Still, people couldn't help but admire the gesture. In a world often filled with cynicism, this was proof that humility and kindness could still inspire millions. Letters began to arrive at William's small apartment. Strangers wrote to thank him for his service. Children sent drawings of American flags and beaches with soldiers standing tall. Some veterans, younger men from later wars, reached out too, sharing how his pilgrimage gave them strength to confront their own memories. William read each letter carefully, his hands trembling, his heart full. One envelope stood out. It bore no return address, only the neat handwriting of someone who clearly valued privacy. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The note read, "You honored them, And you reminded the world. That's all that matters. With respect, T.H. Williams' lips curved into a soft smile. He pressed the letter to his chest, whispering, "Thank you, Tom." As weeks turned into months, Williams' health began to decline. His body was fragile, and though the trip had filled him with life, age was an enemy no man could defeat. Yet even in weakness, he carried a serenity that surprised those around him. When friends visited, he would often say, "I can go in peace now. I've seen Normandy again. I've said my goodbyes." One evening, sitting by the window with the fading sun painting the sky, William shared a final reflection with his granddaughter. "Promise me one thing," he said, his voice faint but steady. "Promise you'll keep telling the stories, not just mine, but theirs. The world must remember." She nodded through her tears. "I promise, Grandpa." With that, William Carter closed his eyes and let the quiet fill the room. His pilgrimage was over, but his story, carried by family, by strangers, by the kindness of one man who believed in remembering, would live on. For in the end, history is not just in books or monuments. It is in the hearts of those who choose never to forget. The small church in William Carter's hometown was filled with quiet reverence. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the pews where neighbors, friends, and family gathered. They had come not to mourn, but to celebrate a life that had carried the weight of history and yet ended in peace. At the front of the church rested a simple wooden frame containing William's photograph. In it, he was standing on Omaha Beach, hand pressed to his heart, the sea stretching endlessly behind him. Around the picture lay his medals, his folded flag, and a single white rose, the same flower given to him in Normandy by the little girl who told him, "We remember." The pastor spoke of William's courage, of the lives he had saved in 1944, and of his final journey back to France. "He taught us," the pastor said gently, "that memory is not a burden, but a gift. That even the quietest acts of kindness can echo across generations." His granddaughter stepped forward, her voice trembling as she held up the note signed simply, T.H. She read it aloud. "You honored them, and you reminded the world. That's all that matters." With respect, T.H. She looked out at the congregation and added, "This letter meant everything to him. It reminded him that he was not forgotten, that none of them are forgotten." Tears shimmered in the eyes of those gathered. Some were veterans themselves, saluting in silence. Others were children, clutching small flags, listening as history became real in a way no book could teach. Far away in California, Tom Hanks sat quietly in his study. On the desk before him lay a small newspaper clipping, a photo of William's funeral, the church filled with light. Hanks ran his hand over the page, his expression solemn but warm. He had never met William in person, but their lives had intertwined in a way neither could have predicted. The gesture that had begun as a simple act of kindness had become something larger, a bridge between generations, a reminder of the cost of freedom. He leaned back, whispering softly, "Rest now, soldier. You've earned it." Years passed, but the story of William Carter continued to ripple outward. His granddaughter kept her promise, sharing his story in schools, community centers, and veterans' halls. Every time she spoke, she held up the faded photo of William on Omaha Beach and the note from Tom Hanks. And each time, people listened, their hearts stirred by the tale of a young man's bravery, an old man's dream, and the kindness that made it possible. Children who once heard her speak grew up to tell the story to their own children. And so William lived on, not only in memory, but in inspiration. His life became a reminder that history is not only written in textbooks, it is written in the choices we make, in the compassion we show, and in the promises we keep. For those who knew William, his journey was more than a return to Normandy. It was proof that even in the last chapter of life, hope can bloom. That kindness, whether from a stranger, a neighbor, or a world-famous actor, can change everything. And that remembering, truly remembering, is the greatest honor of all. So if you ever find yourself on the shores of Normandy, standing among the rows of white crosses, pause for a moment. Think of William Carter. Think of the men who never came home. And think of the quiet kindness that ensured one old soldier was able to say goodbye. Because in the end, legacies are not measured by fame or fortune, but by the love we leave behind. And William Carter's legacy, carried by a family, a nation, and a friend named Tom Hanks, will never fade. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of memory and kindness, I'd be grateful if you supported this journey. A simple like or subscription helps keep these stories alive for others who need them. Because in sharing, we remind each other, even in the darkest nights, we are never truly alone.